What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. We continue with our schedule previews and record projections here early on in the offseason as we try to get you set for the 2021 college football season. Texas Longhorns are up next, and make sure if you're a Texas fan, you subscribe to our Texas channel. It's another team channel that we have with Mark Rogers, the voice of college football, is what we have named these team channels, and you'll see other contributors on there as well. So make sure you check it out, subscribe if you are a Texas fan, and you can find all of our team channels at sg1sports.com/channels. It's back to a 12-game schedule for Texas in 2021. Last year, they only played one non-conference game. That was against UTEP. But this year, they will be back to playing their 3 non-conference games. Now, they did play everyone in the Big 12 last year. Texas made it through, well, except for Kansas. I think that was the only game they had canceled. But other than that, they played everyone in the Big 12. They were supposed to play every team in the Big 12. And that's the story with the Big 12 every year. So that's not going to change. It's simply the non-conference schedule. And then, of course, when and where you play those conference games. So let's look at the schedule here. 7-3 for Texas last year, and you see a very, very tricky non-conference schedule this year. They don't play a powerhouse team. They don't play Ohio State. They don't play Alabama. They don't play anyone like that. But when you start out with a young team right there on the road, or not on the road, but against a very good veteran team in Louisiana, then on the road at Arkansas, that's a couple of tough matchups there. Louisiana is actually the most experienced team. As far as returning production goes, Louisiana, #1 in the country, and we're talking about a team that was a top 25 team last year. This is going to be a very difficult test for Texas right there, week 1. That's a tough matchup. I know a lot of people are going to look at this schedule and say, well, Louisiana, Arkansas, that's not too bad of a non-conference schedule. But I'm telling you, those are both very tricky games. Arkansas in week 2 on the road. Arkansas is another team with a lot of experience coming back this year, a program that seems to be headed in the right direction. And of course, if we have full capacity stadiums, and that's what when I go through and do this, that's my line of thinking. I think we will have full capacity stadiums, or at least something like 50%. You know, there's going to be a home field advantage next year, in my opinion, all across the country. So that's going to be a tough matchup there as well. And then they play Rice on September 18th. So they play their 3 non-conference games right there, weeks 1, 2, and 3. Not a marquee matchup on that schedule, but a couple of games that are going to be very tough. Like I said, in Louisiana and Arkansas. Then they will get into Big 12 conference play. They open up with Texas Tech. That's a pretty good way to start. I know they struggled to beat Texas Tech last year, had to come from behind, but Texas Tech is still towards the bottom of the Big 12. So I think that's a good home matchup to start off Big 12 play. And then they play on the road at TCU. That's going to be a very difficult matchup. TCU just beat them last year. This time it's on the road. And TCU is a team that brings back a lot of production from last year. So a tough matchup there. Then Oklahoma on October 9th in Dallas. Of course, this is going to be one of the biggest games of the year in the Big 12. Will Texas be up there in the top 2 or 3? It's hard to say. They're going to be a young team. But if they are, this could potentially be a game that has big-time implications on who makes it to the Big 12 championship. So a big game there on October 9th. And they followed that up with Oklahoma State at home. Another tough matchup. I'm telling you, the Big 12 is going to be a very tough conference this year. And I think you really just don't get any days off outside of maybe Kansas. It's just going to be a grind in the Big 12 this year. Oklahoma State up next. Then it's on the road at Baylor on October 30th. Now, they'll have a bye week between Oklahoma State and Baylor. Pretty good spot for that bye week. It's right there almost in the middle of the season, so it's a good spot. You get to rest, get to take a little time off. It's not before a big game. I think that's really the only negative to where their bye week is, but it's going to be a much-needed bye week by that time. We're talking about having to play let's just look at the 3 games before that. TCU, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State. Those are 3 tough games back-to-back. And then you've already played, 7 games to this point. So they'll need a break by this point. They'll get it. Then they'll go down the stretch here where they'll play Baylor on the road. Baylor, similar to Texas Tech, I think they're still one of the bottom teams in the Big 12. but it's not going to be a game that you just show up and win, especially on the road. So that could be a tricky matchup there as well. Iowa State on the road, November 6th. Very tough matchup. Maybe the toughest game on this schedule, just because we're talking about probably a top 10 team on the road. When I'm just kind of grouping these teams together, Oklahoma and Iowa State are two top 10 teams. So they're kind of those top teams in the Big 12 looking at it right now. And Iowa State here on the road makes that maybe the toughest game on the schedule. They get Kansas after that at home. I mentioned earlier they didn't play Kansas last year, so they'll get to play them this year. Then West Virginia on November 20th. West Virginia is going to be a very good team this year. This is a team that finished towards the middle of the Big 12 last year. Had some games maybe go against them, and it could have potentially been an even better year for West Virginia had they won some close games. So you're talking about a tough place to play late in the season. And if Texas is, say, in contention in the Big 12, if they are a top 15 team or whatever, or maybe even better than that, who knows? That is just one of those games that has upset written all over it. On the road at West Virginia, November, late in the season. That right there could be a game that potentially trips up Texas. And then they'll play Kansas State on November 27th. That is where they will close out the season at home. Kansas State is always a tough team to beat. Never a team that you're just going to show up and win against. Just like, really every team in the Big 12. Outside of Kansas, I think you've got to bring your A game or you're going to be in a dogfight late and you could potentially lose. Now, Kansas State, they beat 69-31 last year. They won that game easily. But still, I think this is a game that you have to look at as potentially being a challenge. But playing at home with the talent levels of these two teams against Texas is just, when you look at the talent for Texas, they're maybe the second most talented team recruiting-wise in the Big 12, and Kansas State's down towards the bottom. So you got to like Texas' chance in this game playing at home, even though it is the last game of the season. So looking over this schedule, again, it's just what really jumps out to me, those first two games. Louisiana and Arkansas, back-to-back. Not marquee matchups like I mentioned, but just tough games to win. And that jumps out to me. Then you've got the stretch from TCU to Oklahoma State. Those three games are going to be big. After that, I think the schedule is not too tough as far as tough games in a row. Iowa State going to be, like I said, maybe their toughest game of the year, but they have Baylor before them and Kansas after them. So that works out pretty well. West Virginia, a game that I think could be tricky. You have Kansas and Kansas State before and after them. So I think the schedule sets up pretty well for Texas. You can't overlook those first two non-conference games, and you've got to come out of those three, TCU, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State. You got to come out of those three games with no more than one loss. And if they can do that, I think this is a team that could stay in contention in the Big 12 and maybe potentially play Iowa State in that game on November 6th for a spot in the Big 12 championship. Or maybe they don't even need to win that game. Maybe they lose to TCU and Iowa State, and Oklahoma winds up losing two games. They have the tiebreaker. So there are other scenarios. But like I said, I think TCU, Oklahoma State, you've got to win 2 out of those 3 games to give yourself a chance. And if we're talking big picture, New Year's Six Bowl, potentially a college football playoff berth, which I think is probably not all that realistic, you also have to take care of business against Louisiana and Arkansas. So again, the schedule for Texas doesn't seem like it's going to be one of the toughest in the country by any means, but there is still enough on this schedule that to where it's going to be a challenge. And there are plenty of games that Texas could potentially lose here on this 2021 schedule. Texas only lost 3 games in 2020. One of those games was a loss by 2 points. Another game was a loss by 3 points. The other game was to Oklahoma in overtime. This is a team that almost won every single game in 2020. And, I picked this team to go to the college football playoff. Before the Big Ten and the Pac-12 came back, I picked this team to make it to the college football playoff with just 1 loss. That almost happened. I mean, all 3 of those games could have gone the other way. And if just 2 of those 3 games had gone the other way, we would be talking about a much different story with Texas. Now, they did win some close games as well. Texas Tech was an overtime win. Oklahoma State was an overtime win, beat West Virginia by 4. So I guess it kind of does go both ways. But let's look at this schedule again for 2021 and project what their record could be. 7-3 last year. Again, this is the schedule, and this is the scale that we will use to make this projection. If it's a game where they have less than 10%, it'll be in red. 10-25 in orange, 26-40 in yellow, 60-74 in purple, 75-90 in blue, over 90% is in green, and then your 50-50 games, they will stay in white. We're talking 41-59%. And, there is no exact formula for this. I simply just kind of group teams together based off of where they finished last year and what they have coming back. So returning production and where they finished last year. So, for example, in the Big 12, your top tier is going to be Iowa State and Oklahoma, two teams that are figured to be top 10 teams. And then you have your next group of teams where I think you would find Texas teams that are going to be maybe top 25 or just outside the top 25. And that's kind of how we group these teams together. So for Texas, we start with the easy wins. We're going to go there. We're going to go with the easy wins, the games that they should absolutely win. We're talking games where they'll be favored by 20 or more. And I think you've really only got one here for Texas, and that is Rice, September 18th. I think that's the easy win on the schedule for Texas. You can make an argument for Kansas, but it is a conference game, and Texas is going to have some question marks. They're going to be a young team. They have a lot of production gone from last year. They have a first-year head coach. So, yeah, there are some question marks for Texas, and that's why you never know about a team like Kansas. But Kansas is going to be in this next category, the blue games. We've got three of those, Texas Tech, Baylor, and Kansas. Now, these are not all equal. Kansas is close to 90%. Texas Tech and Baylor, I think, are both close to 75%. If Texas Tech was on the road, I'd probably drop them into the purple. Texas Tech is also a team that does not have a ton of production coming back, and neither does Baylor. And so when you go back and look at where the teams finished last year, Texas was much higher than both of those teams. They have similar returning production, so there's no reason to really think that those teams are going to have a great shot to beat Texas, but they have a shot. And again, that's why it's in blue here. And I think those games are close to 75%. These are games where I think Texas will be favored by double digits, but maybe not 20. So, they could be favored by 10, 11 points against Texas Tech and Baylor, and then 18 against Kansas. So that these games are not all the same, but we have to kind of group them together. So those are your four wins. I think Texas feels pretty comfortable about winning all four of those games. Of course, it's the Big 12. Of course, it's college football. Upsets can happen. You could go on the road to face Baylor and lose. Baylor could be a surprise team this year. You never know. But just a conservative approach to this, I think Texas should be able to win those four games. Now we look at the next set of games, the games in the purple. Games where I think Texas is going to be favored, but not by a lot. We're talking 7, 8 points, 6 points, maybe something like that. And really don't have a lot of games in this category for Texas. Just one, Kansas State. Again, Texas beat them easily last year. The game is at home for them. It's hard to imagine them being an underdog. I think they will be favored by about a touchdown. Kansas State will be a tough out, of course, but Texas will be the clear favorite. So that's another game where I think they're going to be favored. But let's go to the other side of this, the games where I think Texas will be an underdog, and I think you have two of those. You have Oklahoma and you have Iowa State. I believe Texas will be about a touchdown underdog in both of these matchups. And again, when we go back to the grouping of teams, Oklahoma and Iowa State seem to be top 10 teams this year, or they're projected to be top 10 teams this year. Texas is not. So I think there is a clear advantage for Oklahoma and Iowa State just looking at it from that perspective. But I do think these games will be close, and I think Texas will have a chance to win both of them. So that we're talking again about spreads that are 6 or 7 points, somewhere in that range, under 10. And then you look at the rest of the schedule here. Louisiana, Arkansas, TCU, Oklahoma State, and West Virginia. All 5 of these games are 50-50 games for me. These are games that I could see going either way, and I really feel that way. You look at Louisiana in week 1, and this, if I'm a Texas fan, this game scares me. This game scares me to death. This is exactly the type of game that Texas has traditionally lost. They have lost these season openers against teams that maybe don't have a big brand name, teams that they think they're going to be able to beat. Will that continue with Steve Sarkisian, or will they be focused and will they be ready? And it's not just the being focused and being ready. This is a really good team, and it's a veteran team. Louisiana brings back more production than anyone in the country. They upset Iowa State last year in week 1. Remember that? this is going to be a tough matchup. And honestly, I don't know who I would favor right now. These are two teams that are probably both going to be in the top 25, not in the top 10, but probably towards the bottom of the top 25. The game's at home for Texas. That gives them an advantage. But again, you're talking about a veteran Louisiana team against a very young Texas team. A lot of things do point towards Louisiana in this game. And then Arkansas right after that on the road is kind of similar. It's just going to be a tough game. Arkansas is a team that is trending in the right direction. You're playing on the road. So that is a tough way to start the season with a couple of 50-50 games. Now, I probably would favor Texas over Arkansas. Even though it's on the road, I think it's very close. But I'd probably say that Texas will be favored by about a field goal. But again, that's a tough one. TCU on the road. A TCU team that just beat Texas. They have a lot of production returning. I would favor TCU in this game, but it's a very slight favorite, and that is why, again, I have this game in the white in the 50-50. Oklahoma State lost some big-time playmakers from last year, but again, this is a team that's always good, and this is going to be a tough matchup here, one that I think really could go either way. And then you've got West Virginia towards the end of the season on the road. Tough place to play. West Virginia brings back a lot of production. This will be a veteran team, and this will be a tough one as well. So you've really got 8 games on this schedule that are in the white, in the purple, or in the yellow. Games that really could go either way. They're not all 50-50 games, but all 8 of these games could go either way. And that makes for a tough projection because, is Texas going to win all these games, or are they going to lose all these games? Are they going to split these games? How is it going to play out? If I'm doing a prediction video, I would predict each game, and I might pick them. I might say, I think they're going to win 6 of these 8 games. They're going to go 10-2. That might be my prediction, but that's not how we do this. This is simply a projection. Our predictions will come later on, but we're simply projecting what the record could be based off of these percentages, based off of how tough this schedule is. And again, I picked Texas to go to the college football playoff last year, so trust me, I'm not a Texas hater. I'm just simply going off of these numbers. And I think this is a pretty realistic projection. So when you average those games out, the games that are not in green and not in blue, the projection for Texas is really to split those 8 games and lose 4. Win 4, lose 4, finish 8-4 overall. That is the projection for the Texas Longhorns in 2021. Like I said, it could go better. They could beat everyone and maybe lose to Oklahoma and Iowa State, 2 games where I think they're going to be slight underdogs. And then they beat everyone else. It's a 10-2 season. They're going to a New Year's Six bowl. But there are a lot of question marks. This is going to be a young team, a new head coach, and the schedule just has a lot of games that are going to be tough 50-50 type games, and it's going to come down to how they perform in those games. Do they win those close one-possession games? Last year, they pretty much split them, and the projection would say that they're probably going to split them again. But if they can win those games, the talent is there. Texas will have a chance to have a really good year. But the conservative projection here for Texas is 8-4. Now, they could be 10-2, they could be 6-6, but again, the average here is 8-4 for Texas. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Give me your thoughts on this down in the comments below, and thank you for watching this video.